Well, you've seen many an EV on Tech Today, but what really goes in designing and building an EV, especially at MG here in London? Also, a top conversation with a top cybersecurity expert, Chris Novak. All that and a lot more as Tech Today says Namaste London.
Action. Well, I've always wanted to do that on Tech Today, but this is a very special episode where I'm your host Ayush Alavadi and I'm here in London. Now, you must have seen a bunch of EVs on the show. In fact, most recently, you saw the MG ZS EV. A lot of you all wrote into us telling us how you fancied that particular model and how it looks good in electric red. So we thought if you really like the design of that car, then maybe we should get you to the headquarters where all the design elements were put together by our next guest, Carl Gotham. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Nice to see you.
So Carl, I don't know if you caught our last episode with the MG ZS EV, and we had quite a good time with it, but something that really piqued my interest was the design. And I thought that's a great way to start this conversation with you. You know, I look at these EVs and the EV revolution that we're talking about in India and around the world, and a lot of cars seem to be looking a lot more futuristic. I don't know if it's the Elon Musk revolution around the world and what Tesla did, but even with MGs, we're seeing a certain design language. Is that well thought out? And is that something which varies from region to region, or is that something that happens here in London and then is spread across the world?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question. And with ZS in particular, ZS EV, that was kind of designed as a global car for the brand. So MG's obviously on its future journey. You know, it's coming up to 100 years old, but actually as a brand, it's very much about facing the future again and moving into this kind of really exciting territory of electrification. So the design for that really was, it's a global car and it's selling really well everywhere at the moment in India and in the UK. I think this week MG India have announced 100,000 cars sales in 3 years. So it's so the brand's doing very well. And it's there to reflect this kind of transition from combustion engine into this future of electrification.
You know, you set up this Psych Design Center, which is essentially where all the innovation's happening here in the heart of London. And we thought we need to focus a lot more on innovation here in London. Why are so many companies, especially the ones focusing a lot more on design language in the tech world, in the auto world, really looking at London as a hub for this?
Well, I mean, London's always been a very creative kind of capital of the world. It's where the fashion industry is very prevalent and the arts. Theatres are everywhere. There's loads of beautiful architecture, and it's all very different. It's very sort of diverse. So I think being in a place like London gives the designers, myself and the design team, the kind of exposure to lots of different inputs and experiences, and it's very rich and colourful. So how can that not be inspiring?
Absolutely, Carl. You know, we've tried to get as much color as we could on this shoot, and even though this is a top secret location, we've tried to intersperse a few elements out here. You have a big bunch of VR offerings out here. There's a whole bunch of mock-ups. What happens here at the Psych Design Studio? Yeah, well,
we're an advanced design studio as part of SIC Motors, so the parent company of MG Motor, and our remit is really sort of at the front end of the process. So we're here to sort of research and get that kind of context of global trend and what consumers are looking for in the future, and we're exploring what that future sort of design language and trends looks like for the brands that we work for. So of course MG's one of the main ones that we do work for.
So in terms of MG coming up with a supercar, is that something that's in the works?
Well, the model behind you, possibly the audience can see just to the right hand side of yourself, was a concept that we developed 2 years ago. It was shown last year at Shanghai Auto Show. So that's going through into production, and it will be a bit of a flagship for the future vision of the brand. The sporting heritage, but with this kind of very forward-facing electric technology. Right. So we're very excited about that car.
What do you really foresee in terms of the design language for these cars? Are they going to get look, with EVs coming out there, obviously storage and luggage changes, the battery pack changes things compared to combustion engines.
Yes.
But this shift to EVs,
Yes.
how much does that change the design language of the car?
Well, it changes a lot of aspects from proportion of vehicles in terms of the way they're laid out, as you've sort of mentioned, where the batteries are going, where the motors are going. We haven't got a big lump in the front of the car anymore. We've got a big engine, so that does drive a lot of proportional change. In terms of sort of brand language, obviously identity. We all identify a car brand with its face and its grille and so forth, but we don't need big grills anymore. So a lot of there's a lot of kind of exploration about how do you convey the message of a brand without a big face, So, and in terms of surface language, absolutely that is changing to a much more kind of clean aesthetic, more simplified, a cleaner language to represent the clean technology, really. So, so there's lots of things happening.
But one challenge that we faced, and we always face it when we have EVs on the show, and I've been trying to search all over London and see what the situation is like, is this sense of range anxiety that everyone talks about, right? In terms of how much do I need to top up or really, fill up the gas tank, so to speak, to actually last on an EV. Now, I know you understand the design and the tech space really well. Is that something as a consumer in London that MG is working on a lot as well? Because in India, we sometimes struggle to find charging stations.
No, it's a real issue, and I think for for a kind of city like London that's very well established, it's there's not a lot you can do with the infrastructure because it's been here for a long time. So it's quite a challenge. It is a challenge for sure, and I know lots of people that own EVs in London. They have that sort of practical issue of where to charge it. I think range anxiety itself is becoming less of an issue because I think people are becoming more familiar with what their cars can do. Obviously battery technology is improving all the time, but actually the reality is that people don't need a car to do more than 150 miles really in one trip average anyway. So but of course the next few years we're going to see those ranges extend massively. So
it's kind of interesting now when we look at some of these iconic brands, especially here in England, Jaguar Land Rover, and then there's an India connection for them, and then with MG, there's a connection in China as well. When you view it as from an auto industry perspective, does it really change the way these companies think in terms of innovation when we actually have a change of ownership from the legacy owners?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key there is it's about entering new markets. It's about entering markets that are growing really quickly. As we know, obviously China has done in the last 15 years. It's exploded to become the biggest market in the world. Obviously India is growing year on year and is getting into the top volume markets in the world. So actually for any manufacturer, it's a new playing field. It's getting used to new customers, new requirements, new environments, new conditions, which for a designer is a very interesting prospect because it means you've got to think about something new. So I think it's definitely an important factor for any of those OEMs, and I think what you're seeing in the industry is a lot of change. There's a lot of companies that have been doing things one way for a long time are having to change. They're having to sort of progress and get out of their comfort zone. So,
Carl, you were talking about emerging markets, and an issue we face with a lot of EVs that we've been driving on Indian roads, and we were the first to drive a Tesla on Indian roads as well, which is quite a rare occurrence. One issue that we face, and especially with Teslas, because they've gone to so many markets and the ground clearance doesn't seem to change. And that's quite a cumbersome task when you're driving on Indian roads because you've got to slalom your way across breakers and stuff like that. When you're coming up with a car at MG, and maybe it's specifically for the Indian market or for emerging markets, do you consider these sort of things, which are region specific, so to speak?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work goes into homologating cars for various markets. So, so they're not. The way they ride and handle, is different from market to market because of the requirements and how people drive their cars. So I think you might, having spent some time in London, see how people drive here. People tend to drive quite fast. They like the cars to handle relatively well, so they tend to be on the stiffer side, which obviously doesn't suit road conditions that are obviously of a poorer quality, let's say. So I think every market needs to be considered so that we're not making exactly the same car for every single market.
Carl, absolute pleasure having you with us on Tech Today. Thanks so much for this Tech Geek's perspective on what's happening in the EV space and what's really happening, well, when it comes to design. And the next time, perhaps, when we do this conversation, maybe it'll be in an MG supercar in Mumbai.
Yes, let's hope so. Yeah,
absolute pleasure. Thanks so much, man.
Yeah,
Take care.
Oh, okay, you got me in the act. Look, if you take a tech geek and you leave him on a set with so many gadgets, something that looks like this in the middle of your office, what do you expect? Clearly, you need to give me some time to really review this and maybe do it on a subsequent episode, or maybe just take a break. So why don't you take a break, let me enjoy, and there's a lot more on this London special. See you soon.
And I hope you're enjoying our special coverage here from London. Now, as soon as I get to a new city, the first thing I do as a tech geek is find fellow tech geeks. And in my search and hunt here in London, I ended up at the Verizon 5G labs and caught up with one of the world's top cybersecurity experts, Chris Novak. We spoke about cybersecurity being a borderless problem, of course, what the blockchain means, and where does India lie in the equation. Have a look. Chris, I'd like to start off by asking you, we've been talking about 5G all day, but when you start viewing things from a security perspective, how much has the threat landscape evolved in an era of 5G?
Sure, yeah. So when we look at 5G, I kind of look at it as analogous to the start of the internet, where we had all these devices that now are starting to get connected, and all of that means we need to protect it. We need to wrap cybersecurity around it in order to keep those assets, applications, and data safe. With 5G, we're now able to add more in terms of connectivity. We're able to make everything faster, but it also means we need to deploy cybersecurity to all of those new endpoints as well. So while it may present an increased challenge in terms of there's more work to be done, it also presents an increased opportunity, as it means that our security tools will be able to connect faster. We're able to connect data from further off places. So I think there's a big upside to everybody as it relates to cybersecurity and 5G.
So Chris, when we're talking about 5G, that seems to be one element. The other buzzwords seem to be crypto, NFTs, the metaverse. When you look at these emerging technologies, do you see, from your experience and your lens, a larger threat, a larger cybersecurity threat?
Yeah, so I'd say the metaverse does present new threats, and I think part of it is it's a concept that most individuals and organizations haven't really contemplated what that looks like from a cybersecurity perspective. It's so new for so many, right? If you also mentioned things like crypto and NFT, these are also, for the average person, very new concepts. For most businesses, very new concepts. Unless you are laser focused and this is your area, you're probably not even thinking about it. And the challenge that presents, kind of think of it going back to the early days of like .com, for example. Most organizations had no idea what cybersecurity was. And so it led to a lot of these organizations being hacked and breached and data getting out. I think the same risk exists for metaverse, NFT, crypto, where it is so new that in many cases, cybersecurity is usually an afterthought. And so there is inherent and I think increased risk until there's broader awareness and adoption.
Chris, you've also worked extensively with the Biden administration on a White House committee as well. Tell us more about some of that work and also tell us about how the US is really looking at some of these problems, because cybersecurity, as we know, is a borderless problem. A problem for you in the US could end up for us in India a few months later. So when you look at these things, are you looking at it from more of a macro, bigger picture view?
Yeah, so great points all around, and thank you around the Cybersecurity Safety Review Board. So that is actually an initiative where the concept is much like in the US we have something called the National Transportation Safety Board. And I say it's a great analogy because that was created in the 1960s to help us make transportation safer, whether it be cars, trains, planes. And over the course of the 50, 60, 70 years that followed, all of those modes of transportation have only gotten safer for all of us. And so now what we've done is say, okay, let's build the same kind of concept for cyber, because cyber is now, we used to call it the information superhighway, right? It is essentially a form of infrastructure for a lot of what we do today. And so it requires the same level of review, oversight, and then also when we see incidents happen there, the objective of the board is to investigate those incidents and be able to provide recommendations and feedback to the president on what new public policy initiatives might be valuable in helping to reduce risk and limit the likelihood of future similar incidents. Essentially make the cyber information superhighway safer for all of us.
Chris, another thing I want to speak to you about is how a lot of us have been working from home over the past couple of years, now working from anywhere for millennials and Gen Z, and everyone now essentially looks at it as a hybrid workforce. Maybe this is here to stay, but a lot of organizations had to do this overnight. Now, when things happen too fast, sometimes there are issues. Do you see concerns with all of this work from home sort of situation happening overnight?
Yeah, so that is a big concern for us. In fact, I have a lot of conversations with chief information security officers and chief security officers about that exact problem. And it's interesting because when we look back at the dynamic of what happened during the course of the pandemic, one of the challenges most of them said was, if you were to tell me that I needed to move my entire organization remote and I needed to do it in 2 or 3 weeks, I'd tell you it was impossible. Can't be done. But yet during the pandemic, nearly everybody did it. Some maybe a little longer than others, but most organizations would tell you if they were going to make that a project, it'll be a 2 or 3 year project, not a 2 or 3 week project. So there's a tremendous amount of concern around the effectiveness of it and the security of it, what might have been missed, what corners have been cut. And then also the other challenge you have is, as people went and worked from home, you also have a lot of individuals that are trying to find ways to keep their job going. They say, well, you know what? If my company didn't provide me with a laptop, maybe I go out and get one of my own, or maybe I use a personal one, for example. And so that introduces new types of threats to the enterprise that the enterprise wasn't prepared for, wasn't ready for. And then honestly, the converse of that is you have organizations now that are starting to return people back to the office, and they're now trying to deal with that as well. And if you look at it through the lens of someone in security, the challenge they face is they're trying to look for anomalies, unusual behavior that might indicate something is amiss. Everything over the last couple of years has been unusual behavior for us because we're not going to the office like we were. Maybe now we're returning to the office part-time, we're working remote, maybe we're working remote from an alternate location. All of these things are red flags for security, but they're now considered normal. So it also means that there's a higher likelihood that when a red flag goes off and it's really a concern, security may miscategorize it and think it's nothing.
Chris, we spoke about NFTs and crypto earlier in the metaverse, and all of this really is contingent on one thing, the blockchain. Now, when I speak to a lot of people in the cybersecurity community, there's some of them who are pro and some of them who are against the blockchain as a cybersecurity tool. Some people say it's even better than end-to-end encryption. Now, the way the blockchain is built, I'd like to get your view because you're one of the world's leading cybersecurity experts. Is the blockchain an effective tool for cybersecurity management?
Yeah, so I would say that blockchain has a role it can play in cybersecurity. I don't think it is the silver bullet for cybersecurity. I think that the individuals who feel that it plays a role or is something that can be used, they're looking at it from the standpoint of being able to have an immutable record source. When we look at security, we want to have audit trails. We want to be able to know what someone does, when they did it, where they did it, and if we can, why they did that. And the more we can have good, solid records of that, the better we can identify when there might be something suspicious or malicious happening, as well as if something gets past us and we have an incident to investigate, having something that might be blockchain based will give us resiliency in terms of that underlying data. We'll have essentially a breadcrumb trail we can follow of evidence. Without something like blockchain, we can still have traditional evidence sources, but the challenge that exists with those evidence sources is there's a greater potential for them to be lost or corrupted that ultimately could result in us not being able to fulfill that obligation, right? We might miss a security threat, or we might not be able to do a full, complete, comprehensive investigation as we'd like. Now, obviously, all that being considered, we haven't had blockchain as part of security for most of our cybersecurity landscape or journey up until this point, and we've obviously done very well. So I look at blockchain as something that we could use as an enhancement as we go forward to make that all much more improved.
Chris Novak, thanks so much for joining us on Tech Today.
My pleasure.
Well, for the last couple of years, a lot of us have worked from home, and now as we enter this hybrid workforce, a lot of us want to work from anywhere. Me, for instance, from here in London. So if you're actually doing that and signing into office or trying to work from a cafe, how do you make tech jugaad work for you? And especially if you want to figure out work-life balance. Well, if all these things matter to you, then catch this special report from our reporter, Shivan.
You know, how often does it happen that you're in the middle of a Zoom call or you're in the middle of an online seminar or online session, online meeting, and then suddenly someone calls you and everything gets disrupted. You don't want to put your phone on D&D and the calls are coming in and you're getting disturbed. There is a way, there is a tech hack, there is a secret code which you can put in your phone with which you can access all the features of your phone. You'll have your 4G intact and your Wi-Fi connectivity intact, but anyone trying to call you will get this message saying that your number is unavailable and you will know who's calling you too. So the way to do it is fairly simple, and this secret code can be applied on Android and iOS devices. So all you need to do is go on to your Calls app. Once you're on the Calls app, start punching in the code. So you're going to start with a *21* and then 10 times 1 and then hashtag. Dial it down. Now you will get a pop-up saying that call forwarding has been activated. Now what happens with this code is a kind of call forwarding which leads the caller to a pre-recorded note saying that your number that you're dialing is unavailable. So I've put in the code. Now I'm going to try calling my number from another phone to tell you exactly what it's going to sound like.
The number you have dialed is invalid. Please check the number you have dialed. आपके द्वारा डायल किया गया नंबर अमान्य है. कृपया डायल किए गए नंबर की जांच कर लें.
So my phone is pretty much active, but anyone calling me right now will hear this message that the number is invalid. Where you are, whether you're in the flight, whether you're traveling, whether you're unavailable, nobody knows, but you can access your phone and you can access all the other apps on your phone, whether it's 4G, whether it's Wi-Fi, whatever. So as soon as you punch in this code, you also see that call forwarding symbol on the top left of the screen if you're using an iPhone. Okay, so you've used the code and you want to get past it now. You want to come back to normal functionality of the phone. So what do? There is another code for that with which you eliminate this entire setting. So you go back to your Calls app and here you need to punch in hashtag 002 hashtag. That's the code, fairly simple and small, and just dial on this again. When you dial on this, it will tell you that call forwarding has been removed and that call forwarding symbol on the top left will also vanish simultaneously. Now, if someone calls you, the call will come through and it's up to you whether you want to answer it or not. So there are plenty of tricks that we have in our pocket for you. We're going to tell you everything in the weeks to come only on the Tech Today Show.
See, I told you, Tech Jugaad works in Mumbai, works in Delhi, and of course, it works here in London. That's something I might be using, especially if you're working from home. I hope you've enjoyed this show. We spoke to Chris Novak, one of the world's top cybersecurity experts. And of course, we gave you all there is from the MG London special. Well, if you've liked the show, then do write in to us and subscribe to our social media pages. Until next week, adios.